I'm really, really happy to be speaking to one of my best friends and one of my longtime colleagues and sisters, Marwa Osman, who I'm sure everyone will know from Mideast Stream and her amazing work on the regional events, which certainly in Lebanon have become really devastating in the last, let's say, 18 months. So I wanted to start with the fact that Lebanon has been, let's say, under attack on many fronts for some time. At least it has been escalating in the last, let's say, 2 years, both economically and through foreign interference. When, in your opinion, did this start to have a serious effect? And when was the country put into economic freefall, and who was responsible for that?
Thank you for having me, Vanessa. It's a pleasure, and thank you for the kind introduction. It's way too much that I deserve, but thank you very much for that. Well, Lebanon has been basically on a free fall, historically speaking, since 1920, not from today, because our financial system was directly linked with a financial system put in place by colonial powers, namely at that time by Britain, and then given to France by certain regional agreements. But at first we were linked to the Ottoman Empire, but when they lost in the war, we were tossed between Britain and France, and then it landed in the lap of Britain at first, with the first financial institution that resembles some sort of a central bank, and then it was the French who controlled it. But still, the major financial system in Lebanon that, according to it, an economy was supposed to be built due to French superpower, we had an economy of import instead of an economy of agriculture and industry. So it started from way before the beginning of Lebanon. And what happened is Lebanon was still part of Damascus at that time, but when Lebanon was given its independence, we didn't really take independence. It's a joke. What kind of an independence with no martyrs, zero martyrs? That did not happen. We were given some sort of a self-determination into a certain angle, but the major issue here was breaking us apart from a greater Syria, and that's what happened. At that time, we're talking about 1943, between the 40s and the 60s, Syria was building up its own financial system, and it already had a great economy going on. It had great swaths of land, was investing in the right place, and decided that it's not going to be an import country, rather an export one, and would use its internal economy to build up a unified community of Syrian Levantinians. But at that time, Lebanon was falling in the lap of the colonial system, and the people put in power were people who literally sat in the lap of the colonial powers, and decided to keep the import industry alive, and switched into a financial system completely in the hands of the colonial powers, which later on was given to the people who were appointed by the colonial powers to be ruling, which is the elite, the oligarchy in Lebanon. Now, fast forward to 1975, when the civil war started, we had at the beginning of the 60s, we had 3 banks. 1975, we had more than 60 banks in Lebanon, and that's a big number for a small country, but that's a detailed financial issue that we can talk on a separate occasion. But since 1975 up until 1991, actually 1990, when the Taif Accord was then finalized and put into place, 1991, chaos was being receded in Lebanon, more of finishing up with the civil war. 1992, the first parliamentary elections. During that time, it was decided that Lebanon would adopt a financial system of getting loans from international institutions and building interest upon these loans to supposedly build an economy. But because of the corruption in Lebanon, which is in the hands of the oligarchy, which is put in place by the colonial system, all of these loans, loan number 1, loan number 2, loan number 3, France 1, 2, 3, all of these French conferences that happened ended up giving the Lebanese people a burden of 100 billion US dollars in debt. That's without counting the interest rate. And it's a accumulating interest rate. So it's a compound interest rate. And according to the size of Lebanon and the number of the population, that's a big number. And one should ask, where did that money go?
Yeah.
There's no infrastructure. We don't have trains. We don't have subways. We don't have buses, for the love of God. We have cars. Please import more cars, because the cartel of cars is much more powerful than the government that would come and decide to build trains, for example. So this is a long-term dreadful situation in Lebanon, but that came and rose up in 2003. Then there was the third loan that came from, decided definitely by the Hariri, the fathers, Rafi al-Hariri, who was then assassinated in 2005. We don't want to go into that either. It's all politicized. But during that time, economists in Lebanon were screaming that we are headed towards an explosion. No one heard about it. We had the 2006 war that broke us. But with the help of the Friends of the Resistance, with the victory that was upheld when we had a new deterrence equation that eliminated the Israeli threat, they are no more welcome to bomb us, raid us, send mortar shells until yesterday. We'll talk about that later. Yeah. But we had, since 2006, no mortar shells, no air raids. We had violation of our airspace, using our airspace to bomb Syria. We can talk about that later. But after that, from that point on, our economy started going nosediving, to be honest with you. 2015 was a breaking point, and then the explosion happened, because 2015 we stopped having, actually since 2010 we stopped having a governmental, what do you call it, which is a balance sheet, or the government
accountability.
No, the actual balance, the accounting balance that the government does each year, and says that we're going to the expenditures of the government, we're going to have a certain, yes, the budget of the government, which is done every year. We stopped having that way before 2015, but 2015 was a big mark, because the national debt, or the public debt, became very, very big, huge, which means if you are born in Lebanon, you are born into 15,000 US dollars in debt as a baby. And then that number kept increasing. But the major explosion, as you know, happened in 2019. But a year before that, there was, what was happening is that people who had connections with the Lebanese central bank, and again, the people who were heading the positions or leading the positions in the central bank, in Lebanon, had full protection from the West. They were still getting awards. The governor Riyad Saleh got an award from Wall Street the year before the great protest of 2019, saying he is one of the greatest bankers of all time. Of course he is. He robbed us out of our last dollar. But what happened at that time that broke it was that the people would go to the bank, put their money, put it in a safe place. This is what they thought. Instead of investing. Why? Because banks started giving large interest rates for the public, which means, come along, give me your $1,000, I'll give you 17% interest. And that's a number that should have been an alarm for the people. But sometimes people with ignorance and greed, they wouldn't understand what was going on. Yeah. So people started putting their money in the banks. What happened? People's money in the banks. When you take the money, you put it in the central bank, you just put 10% out of it in the bank. So the people's money, the public's money, is in the central bank. What did the central bank do? It gave loans to the government from the people's money. Who is running the government? The elite, the oligarchy, the thieves. They took the money, no investment, no return on investment. They couldn't pay the central bank couldn't pay the people. Hence, when you go to the bank to get your money, there is no money. Boom, 2019 happened. And the rate of the dollar started decreasing in the face of the Lebanese lira, because it was pegged, our money, our currency is pegged to the US dollars, and it has been in the same rate since the early 90s. And then even not scientific. You can't keep a currency fixated without having anything to back it up. It's simple economy, but it's the Ponzi scheme of Lebanon. This is what happened. When you put greedy people in power, this is what happens. And The rest is history and very well known. So the problem did not start in 2019, not in 2010, not in 2005, not in the Civil War. It began way before, when we decided not to fight colonialism like Syria did, because Syria up until now, it has zero debt for the international community. It hasn't taken one dime outside of its own institutions or banking system. That's why it has no public debt. But Lebanon decided to fall in the lap of colonialism and accept everything that they offer. And here we are.
The economic hitman had a party in Lebanon, by the sound of it, and created what is effectively a closed loop money laundering system for the ruling elite.
And you can't bring any of them to you can't hold them accountable. You can't bring them to the justice system, because if you say, well, let's put Riyad Saleh, the governor of the central bank, in jail, or at least let's investigate, you'll get the U.S. ambassador Shia saying he's a red line. Excuse me, who are you again? You're an ambassador of a foreign state telling us that we cannot. And then they say, oh, Lebanon is a corrupt country. Really? Who's enabling the corruption in Lebanon?
Yeah, and I mean, we'll get on to the US authoritarianism over Lebanese free trade also later in the interview. But I think it was yesterday, right, was the anniversary of the horrific Beirut Port explosion, which has had multiple far-reaching and devastating consequences. There's a couple of questions here that I wanted you to cover. First of all, what do you think is causing the delay in the official investigation? Why were the French, the British, and the FBI actually the first investigation teams to enter the port to investigate the incident? And I'm actually quoting from an article up at the Cradle, Sharmin Nawani's new media outlet, where it mentions the fact that Lebanese law stipulates that all explosive materials in the country fall under the jurisdiction of the Lebanese army, or the Lebanese armed forces. So why is the army commander under whose watch the port blast took place not a primary focus in this investigation? That question kind of, you know, neon.
Just put your finger on the wound here, Vanessa.
And I think one other thing that I wanted to mention, first of all, do you think Beirut and Lebanon is going to recover from this event? And also, I'm noting that the latest Amnesty International report into the investigation, of course, as it did with the Hariri assassination, is calling for international intervention. So
they want us to pay more money. We're broke. We can't pay any more for international probes and investigations. That's number one. I'm not going to be paying anyone to do anything anymore. But very interesting questions and very right ones. Let's begin with, is Beirut going to recover? Sadly, no. Why am I saying this? I'm not even saying probably, I'm just saying sadly, no, it won't recover. Why? Because we are burdened with a regime, with a system of governance that wouldn't allow a positive action to happen. What do I mean when I say by that? I'll get to the question of who's responsible. When we say that the shipment docked in Lebanon illegally, docked in Beirut Port in 2013, coming from God knows where it stopped. I don't care about what was written in the papers. Okay, I don't care what was written in the papers, because this can be done, and I basically know how this can be done because I have family members who own companies that ship goods into and out of Lebanon. So I know the system, how it works, and I know that how they sometimes get certain ships where they forge certain paperwork. So it's really easy to forge paperwork. I'm not saying it did not come from that country and was not headed for the other, but I'm saying that paperwork can be tampered with, especially when we're talking about illegal substance here. It might not be illegal, but that amount of substance is questioned. 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, which, by the way, from day one we were told by retired army generals, retired Lebanese army generals, that it was in no way possible that the 2,750 tons exploded, because if they did explode, we wouldn't have seen Beirut nor the Beirut suburbia. It would have been completely destroyed. So from day one, we did have expert information and knowledge telling us that it was in no way possible that this was the amount. It might have been the amount written and that has been docked in Beirut, but it was not the amount that exploded, which means two options. One, it did not explode entirely. It's still there. It went into the sea, which is a far-fetched scenario. Two, it was not there. Why? Because someone moved it. Where? We need to know. Either it was being used just like the ship that was held by the Lebanese army in 2013 that was supposedly going to the Takfiri terrorists in Syria, but was stopped. Either it was going to the same terrorists who were wreaking havoc in Syria, or it was sold. It was used, invested by someone. Who is that someone? Someone who has the jurisdiction, who has the power to actually sell this material. Who am I saying? Well, it's up to you to guess. When we're talking about this sort of material, then it's up to you to guess. That's basically the highest position of security in Lebanon that has that jurisdiction. Yes, heads of states, parliamentarians, members of premiers, prime ministers, judges, they all knew that we had explosive materials in the port. We had 3 judges who had written statements coming from the port telling them that there is explosives. You need to make a decision to move these explosives. Why did these 3 judges decide to put these letters in their drawers and not do anything about it? It's a valid question. If you're a judge and you had an authority send you a statement or a request or a demand, or at least telling you, please help us, you need to help us because we need to move this because it's a residential area, because it's this explosive materials, and you do nothing about it, then I have to ask about your integrity as a judge. Why did you do anything about it? And then again, who did stop you from doing anything about? Who has the power to stop you from doing anything about it? And if they were actually being sold, where was the money going? Because this is illegal business being run by high-ranking officials. So when we want to talk about who's responsible, my question is not only who allowed this ship to dock, but also who allowed the material to stay there, who allowed the material not to be moved to a safe place, who took part of this material and sold it to make profit out of it. These are all valid questions. And this brings us to what happened lately and the horrendous attack on one party in Lebanon, one specific party that has absolutely nothing to do with the port, because they are not allowed to get there, because it's not part of their security apparatus to cover the port of Beirut, because it's basically part of the city that is run by the haters of that one party. That party is being condemned because they refused to lift immunities on the officials that were asked by a Judge Tariq, I think his name is Tariq Bitar, who he didn't even give a request to the parliament. The parliamentarians learned about the request of Tariq for an investigation and to remove lift the immunity of these officials through the media. So it was not even through legal channels. When the parliamentarians asked the judge, where is your evidence? Because you need, according to the law, according to the constitution, you need to provide the parliament with evidence so the parliament can convene and then sign and vote and then sign on lifting the immunities from the officials that you're asking to lift the immunity from. Okay, but where is the names of the judges that held back on taking a decision to remove the explosive materials? Where's the name of the high-ranking officials, especially the commander-in-chief of the Lebanese army, who has direct jurisdiction over this matter? Why aren't we at least asking him questions as a witness, for God's sake? Where is the people who are managing the port, who are supposedly people very close to certain foreign interventionists in our country? Certain embassies in our country, their names are not there. The names of the people that have no jurisdiction over what happened were there. That's why that specific party, I'm talking about Hezbollah here, alongside every other party in the parliament, it's not only Hezbollah that signed on refusing to lift the immunity, it was everyone, because it's a committee that combines all parliamentarians. You saw only a few signatures because this is a committee that has been given the job by all of the parliament to look into the probe. So this is a big lie that Samir Jaja's party did not accept and did not sign, or that party did not. No, everyone signed because this committee represents all the parliament. And up until now, Tariq Bitar, the judge, did not bring about the evidence needed by the parliament to sign for lifting the immunities, and he did not even up until now, because yesterday my show aired. I had a specific episode with Hezbollah member of parliament, Dr. Ibrahim Moussawi, who is part of the committee for the investigation of the 4th of August explosion, the port explosion of Beirut, and his signature was found on that paper for refusing to lift the immunity. And he specifically told me, up until this moment, I have not received any response to the letter that we sent to Judge Bitar, telling him, please give us the evidence, because we would love to lift the immunities, but it has to be constitutional. It has to be by the law. It cannot be illegally done. And this is exactly what happened. Now, when we talk about the probe conducted by the FBI or the French or the Germans or whoever it is, basically they know everything that happened. And what kind of a probe that comes 1 year later that tells us, oh, it was only fifth of the actual total material that really? Literally day one, we were told that by ex-military experts in the Lebanese army, retired army general. This is your probe? Okay, thank you very much. You can go now.
Yeah. And also the fact that the silos protected some of the, or took the impact of some of the blast. Yeah, I mean, exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we lost in those silos. We lost 75% of our wheat, of our material to make bread.
Yeah,
just lost into sea.
Yeah, and as you say, Lebanon is not a producer. It's not an agricultural country. It's not a producer of
everything.
Yeah, exactly. So this was devastating.
Yes. Mind you, I'm sorry I didn't say that it was 231 deaths, 7,000 injuries, 300,000 people homeless in 1 second.
And I'm guessing that the reconstruction efforts are lagging. I mean, of
course they're lagging. Up until now, believe it or not, the families of the fallen were not even, they didn't even receive a call for an apology from any authority. They were not called in as primarily witnesses to talk about their loved ones. Where were they? What were they doing? They're not even called in for any kind of an investigation. To add salt to the injury, when they tried to demand from the current interior minister, they tried to demand justice and truth, they were beaten by security officers. And yesterday, while commemorating the fall, I mean, it's a murder. I'm not going to call them martyrs because they're victims of corruption. They are victims. This is a murder that happened. They were murdered by people who are corrupt, by a government that is so incompetent to a point that would not even apologize to the families of the fallen. And yesterday, to add salt to the injury as well, while commemorating that 1 year that has passed, they were beaten up by the thugs of Samir Jaja, by the Lebanese forces, who are the best friends of the United States of America. Because oh my God, Vanessa, if you could hear the videos that were shot, I mean, they were walking the streets of Beirut and chanting songs from the Lebanese civil war. And it's 231 people from all sects and religions, and even not only Lebanese nationality, Syrians, Ethiopians, Filipinas. We had a lot of Afrikaners. We had people from Europe. We had Lebanese from all over Lebanon who passed. We had more than 43 Syrian nationals who passed away, who were workers inside of the port. And the Lebanese forces decided to make the 4th of August their own commemoration of their own tragedy, as if it's not a Lebanese tragedy, as if not all of us suffered, and as if not all of our houses were destroyed. Why? Because it happened in that specific part, and they believe that part is their part of Beirut. Beirut is for all Beirutans. It's for all Lebanese people. This is our land. We're not going to divide it anymore. But apparently there is an international decision, specifically an American, British / French decision to bring us back into a civil war. But thankfully, the power that, or the party that has the most power in Lebanon has decided not to vote.
I think, I mean, that brings me on to the next question, which is related to the infiltration of Lebanese security forces, intelligence forces, governmental institutions and agencies by UK embassy agents, let's call them, or I would call them UK Foreign Office MI6 agents. And we know from the recent UK Foreign Office document leaks that this has been going on for some time. What, in your opinion, is the UK agenda in Lebanon right now? And, you know, we're seeing, particularly since the Beirut Port explosion, we saw the arrival of the new Napoleon, you know, Emmanuel Macron almost immediately.
Another needs another slap ASAP.
You know, another imperialist vulture coming to pick over the corpse of Beirut at that point. That's how I saw it. But you have these British intelligence operations that have been going on, if you like, in parallel with their operations to destabilize Syria. What do you think is the UK agenda?
Exactly the same agenda that it had for Syria. Exactly the same agenda that they implemented, sadly, in Palestine when they allowed for illegal colonial settlers to come and invade Palestine. What's going on in Lebanon is very, very simple. Lebanon can take one decision and everything will go back to normal, even better than normal. And that decision is to normalize ties with Israel. That's not going to happen. For that to happen, they need to neutralize the people who are capable to say no. And that's what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Breaking the economy is one thing, but then imposing unwritten sanctions on the Lebanese public is another. Can you tell me why right now, while on the border, I'm in the Lebanese part, the border part with occupied Palestine, the last part of the Lebanese map in a village called Khiam, I don't have gas stations open. I've been trying to fill my tank for the past 3 days unsuccessfully. What I did today in order to be able to take one of my family members to Nabatieh to see a doctor, and I'll tell you later why, because she almost broke her hand because of the bombings. Thankfully, we were bombed also yesterday on the 4th of August by Israel. But she fell because of the bombing, because she was surprised. To fill my tank, to take her to the hospital, I had to buy from a friend of a friend a gallon of gasoline to half fill my tank in order to get there and come back. Why don't I have any gasoline? While in Hasbaya, which is 15 meters away from me, where a different sect in Lebanon lives, all of their gas stations are filling up the tanks of the people. And if I go, I get looked upon in a very unsettling way. And I get asked by people, why are you coming here? I was like, excuse me, do you need to see my ID that I'm Lebanese? I can go wherever I want. But I'll answer your question. No, we don't have gasoline. Why? Because your friends are not allowing the gas companies in Lebanon to give us gasoline in the south. We're not allowed to have it. We're not allowed to have fuel for our electricity. When we tried to get gasoline in Lebanese lira, not in US dollars, from Iran, everyone started barking on us, literally barking on us. When we're out of medicine, Lebanon, the #1 country in free medication and in all sorts of medicine that you could find, and in very cheap medicine, is out of medicine. If you get hit or if you fall on a certain metal, you cannot find the specific injection that could help you. We are out of these injections that could help you out in certain situations if you hurt yourself. We can't find this. We have to buy it from Syria. We were begging Syrians last week to help out because one of our children in the south was bitten by a stray dog, and we needed the injection. We couldn't find it in Lebanon. Syrians provided the injection. This is what's happening in Lebanon. Why? Because they refuse to let us engage with the eastern part of the world, whether it's China, it's Iran, Pakistan, Russia, whoever it is. We're not allowed. Why? Because we are literally run by the Brits, by the US, and by the French. Now, to go back to your question about the role of the UK or what they are doing, or how they infiltrated the security apparatus in Lebanon, I could just give you an example. And these issues are not really talked about in Western media because they are internal Lebanese politics. For example, when you have a cabinet in Lebanon and you want to divide or to distribute the ministries, there's the Minister of Interior. It is always a person who has to be a Sunni from the Future Movement. Why is that? There's a big question mark, and this is the Interior. We're talking about a very important ministry in any country. When the leaks happened, and we all saw the leaks, and a lot of Lebanese media spoke about it, but like really, it's either, I'm not going to say zero, but a lot of alternative media, Western alternative media spoke about it, but the mainstream media never even said a word about it.
Nobody mentioned it.
Exactly. When it showed us the hierarchy inside of the internal security apparatus in Lebanon and how it's infiltrated and how much money they receive from the British Empire and how and who is asked to be put in what position and how many years they stay in their position and what kind of orders they get, what kind of information they are being asked to bring to the British Empire. It's horrifying. It's treason.
It's extraordinary. I mean, really extraordinary. When I showed those documents to Peter Ford, the former British ambassador in Syria, he just said it's jaw-dropping, the amount of money that is being poured in by the UK Foreign Office via its outreach agents.
I wouldn't be surprised because thanks to your investigative journalism, Vanessa, we knew that the Brits were giving millions of dollars to a terrorist organization like the Taliban in Syria. So why not giving to actual security apparatus? Why build a network of terrorists when you can actually grab on the regime and the people who are holding on the security of the regime? By the way, the Brits helped the security officers in Lebanon or the security apparatus in Lebanon to build one of the biggest prisons. And they had cells underground and it's built in a Shwaifet area. Guess why? Guess who they want to put inside of it? Because they want to break Hezbollah and have a prison for them there. And there's a very special cell for Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the chief secretary general of Hezbollah. And these leaks were also published in Al Akhbar newspaper. Nothing. No one spoke a word about it. That tells you about the amount of money that's being thrown in the media to silence journalism.
Yeah, and that's extraordinary that, Britain, with its history of MI6 rendition and torture that, of course, they covered up even in the UK, here is building a prison to incarcerate what they consider to be, a terrorist organization. In fact, it's the most influential political organization inside Lebanon, and responsible for the security of Lebanon largely and the borders with Syria. And in Syria itself, it has been responsible for the salvation of Christian towns, of vast swathes of Syrian territory. And here is the British government building a kind of Guantanamo in Lebanon.
Punishing us because we stood by Syria. We didn't leave our brothers and sisters alone. We fought back and we liberated, and we've liberated our own land. We had people until 2015 trying to kill us. I personally was about to be bombed into oblivion with my 2 daughters in my back seat because of a Wahhabi terrorist, UK-funded terrorist. Why? Because they want to punish us for the choices that we make, because we say no to whatever foreign intervention. We say no to imposing politics and not only policies, even financial politics into our lives. Why should I be having a burden and my children having to live with the burden of a financial debt they had nothing to do with?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, yeah, it's that's shocking. I mean, that's something that I didn't even know that the British were doing. God, they don't change. No, I mean, we know after the document leak, the British ambassador, I've written that he fled Beirut, but perhaps we should say he left rather hurriedly. And followed also by a suspected MI6 agent, Alistair Harris, who was also instrumental in the creation. He was the director of a company called Analysis, Research and Knowledge, ARC Group, for whom James Le Mesurier worked, a former British military intelligence officer who founded the White Helmets. And Alistair Harris has also been
one big
yeah, you know, it's just one enormous tentacle Trojan horse, designed entirely to infiltrate and destabilize target nations. But we know now,
and we tried to ask him, by the way, we tried to phone the embassy to get some answers. We were never they never replied. We tried tweeting at the man. I think muted us or just ignored us.
Yeah, this is Martin Longden, right? The guy that took over from the departing ambassador who left for personal reasons. But we know, for example, that Alistair Harris now is back in Lebanon. He's working extensively, with the Palestinian camps. And we know from those documents that another focus of UK intelligence efforts was is ongoing in Tripoli, which of course we also know was intended to be the hub for the plundered,
into Syria.
Yeah, and to receive the plundered oil and hydrocarbons, etc., from Homs, which of course was one of the first cities in Syria to be occupied and invaded by the US coalition proxies. And of course, we know, looking at the map of invasions, that they were targeting the industrial areas, the areas that had oil, water, agricultural resources.
Look where the US is sitting right now.
Yeah, exactly. And the terrorists, the proxies, are still basically controlling the majority of the rich and abundant agricultural areas inside Syria. And this, of course, has been deliberate. And this is, you know, intervention textbook, right?
Definitely, because, you know, if Syria takes back the oil fields, the US dollar would drop back to 50 liras.
We'd have electricity.
Yes.
And Lebanon would
Syria
have
had electricity till 2011.
Yeah.
Syria had an overload of electricity that it was selling to the countries, to the neighboring countries.
Yeah,
but
and also, you know, I mean,
along with its friends.
Exactly, and the thing is, we know that Lebanon is being targeted because of its close relationship to Syria, and that's not only through Hezbollah, that, you know, that's throughout history. And Syria has helped Lebanon has helped Syria, and that, of course, is, you know, they want to put the divide. Yeah. Exactly.
Vanessa, if you just get a map, you'll see how they cut Lebanon out of Syria. Whether they like it or not, we are part of greater Syria. We are more Syrians than we will ever be Arabs. We are Assyrians, we are Canaanites. This is our heritage. Yeah. However, they will try to break it. I mean, history will remain history. They cannot change that.
So why the focus on Tripoli, and why the focus now on the Palestinian camps?
Well, let's start, because it's two separate things. Let's start with the Tripoli issue. Tripoli has always been a gateway into what would happen to the western part of Syria, specifically because it has a waterway that can easily be controlled, unlike Tartus or other Banyas, for example, other coastal lines, other coastal cities in Syria, which are fully under control of the Syrian army and also now their Russian allies. But Tripoli is not. And we have seen that even before the war on Syria. If you remember with me in 2008, when we had in one of the Palestinian camps in North Lebanon, in Tripoli, where the terrorists, the Nusra terrorists that fled into Syria and were part of what happened later on in Syria, they started in Lebanon, in Jund al-Sham and in Nusra. They had so many names, but they had the same financiers, and they had the same ideology as well. And we lost very fine men from the Lebanese army who fought back to at least liberate the camp. The camp was completely destroyed. Sadly, the Palestinian refugees who resided there completely lost their houses. And at the end of the day, the terrorists who wreaked havoc in that area were not even arrested. They were given, because of the American and the British power grip, they were given a waterway to escape into Syria. And I think that was a mistake. And some of them were escaped into places that we don't know. They were picked up, basically, were assets. But that was a big mistake to allow them to leave. I personally think, as a Lebanese citizen, that they should have been eliminated on that spot, because their role was even enormously amplified inside of Syria. But it began then in 2008. And if we go back in history, actually it started even in one of the Syrian governorates during Hafez al-Assad's reign, and he was able to eliminate the Wahhabi Ikhwani ideology that was trying to take a grip and also start unrest inside of Syria. But we're talking about the same ideology, but it's different generation, but still being fed the same ideology and being funded by the same people. Now, Tripoli right now harbors both pro-Syrian Lebanese and anti-Syrian Lebanese, meaning if anything starts in Tripoli, it's going to be a bloodbath. Why am I saying this? Because we already had this in 2013, 2015, 2017. It was a bloodbath between the people of Tripoli themselves. One side doesn't want intervention, doesn't want foreign intervention. They don't want to be against Syria. They want to support Syria, the Syrian government, the Syrian friends, because they're family. It's not just that we are neighboring countries. In that area, which is very close to the Syrian border, families marry from one another, and they have a Syrian heritage, so they're basically family. You're asking them to betray their own family. That's not going to happen. But now, after what happened in 2019 and the collapse of the Lebanese economy, and now you have people who are sadly ready to work in anything to get paid, especially Tripoli, which is a very, very poor area, and it's one of the poorest cities in Lebanon, sadly, again, because of the corruption of the government, because of the incompetence of the government, because of the negligence of the government, just like, for example, Baalbek and Hermel. But Baalbek and Hermel are mainly supporters of the resistance. That's why you won't see that happening, because if they were able to break Baalbek and Hermel, it would have been the easiest way to break Syria, but they couldn't. The biggest party that supports Syria resides in those areas. But in Tripoli, it's a different issue. So they are ready to start a fight in Tripoli to try and break it and take it, and then take that border. They would have a big L border with Syria if they take Tripoli. So that's very, very sensitive. That's number one. Number two, it would be harboring the biggest foreign base, because it has a waterway, and they can easily build an airway, an airport. There already is an airport in the north that is under the control of Ja'ja, the Lebanese forces, which is Halet Airport. So there you go. You would have a waterway and an airport. Just imagine what you could do to the rest of Lebanon.
Yeah, and that combined with, again, it was the Cradle that released the information about the British installing the watchtowers along along the border with Syria. So clearly, they are
they're just sitting ducks, if you.
Yeah, exactly. But clearly that is their next roadmap, is to try and, as you say, to secure.
It's not going to work.
No, of course
it's not going to work.
It doesn't stop them trying. I guess that's that's what I keep saying to people. Even though it's not going to work, the US coalition never abandons a country, or abandons, I don't mean abandons, it never leaves the battlefield, right? It might change its tactics, it might change its strategy. And the same with the UK.
I'll tell you what changed since this began, since 2019 up until today. Actually, it's since 2005 up until today. But to tell you what has really changed is the tolerance of people towards one another, and it has increased the hatred amongst it's not a sectarian war anymore. It's hatred amongst two camps, a pro-US camp and an anti-US camp, a pro-Israel, sadly, a pro-Israel camp and an anti-Israel camp. This is who we are, a pro-Saudi camp and an anti-Saudi camp. So it's no longer a sectarian war or a religious war, the one that, like, for example, that happened in 1975, where Muslims were shooting at the Christians and vice versa. No. You have Muslims, Christians, Jews who are pro-Syria, pro-Yemen, pro-Iraq, pro-Iran, against pro-Palestine. And then you have Muslim, Christians, Jews, whatever you atheists, who are anti all of these things, and even anti-Palestine.
That's really interesting. That's a really interesting point, actually. That's a totally sort of new perspective on that.
And by the way, concerning the watchtowers, it's, by the way, purely illegal. It is, and also the Lebanese army has the power, the constitutional power to dismantle the watchtowers they want. Why? Hello, the best friend of the highest position in the Lebanese army are basically the ambassadors of both biggest colonial empires in the planet. Not gonna happen, not gonna happen. Okay, but according to the UN Charter, we have every right as people to defend ourselves and to resist any form of occupation. And I believe these watchtowers fall under the definition of an occupation. Need I say more?
Yeah, exactly. Very good point. We kind of covered the fact that the US is preventing any kind of trade partnerships with, let's say, the non-aligned axis. And they're threatening to impose sanctions if Lebanon were to turn eastwards or pivot eastwards, as we've discussed. To what extent is the party that we're discussing, Hezbollah, able to provide for the Lebanese people in this crisis? And can you talk about the claims that are, we are constantly seeing in the West, but I believe even in Lebanon, from the factions that you've mentioned that are anti-resistance, anti-imperialism, let's say. Can you counter some of the claims?
They were begging Macron to save them. I don't know from
exactly,
what, but they were begging him to save them.
I'm not sure what he's going to do anyway, but anyway, he can't save his own country. I mean, his own country is being plunged into chaos and state
Don't get me started. I have so many jokes on him. We wouldn't finish. Yeah, don't get me started on him.
But let's cover some of the accusations that are thrown at Hezbollah of cronyism, of corruption, etc. Okay. Yeah, I know.
Well, let us begin. Well, the issue is the people don't know, and I understand why they don't know, because they lack information.
Yeah.
Let me begin by saying, what is Hezbollah? Who is Hezbollah? When did they become to be Hezbollah? It was because of the Israeli occupation of Lebanon. Hezbollah did not even take part in the Lebanese civil war. They were born in 1982, 83 to be exact, as a group of people from the south and the Baqa who decided to fight the occupation because they have had it with the occupation. They were being murdered. Way before there was even a resistance, the Lebanese army was being killed by Israel, one of which is my father-in-law, was killed in 1977 by the Israeli invasion, illegal invasion and occupation into Lebanon, because he was an army soldier, and his checkpoint was in his village in Khiam, and Israel invaded the area and killed him. was way before there was anything called a resistance in Lebanon. There was some sort of a national resistance by the Communist Party, but it didn't really gain much threshold because we all know what happened through the 80s with the dismantling of the Soviet Union and the real help that they were getting from the Soviet Union against the occupation. But in 1983, when Hezbollah was born, it had nothing to do with what is known to be as the government in Lebanon. They officially entered the government of Lebanon in 2005. 1982 till 2005, they had no official existence in the Lebanese government. So basically, when the Ponzi scheme, the financial scheme to rob the Lebanese out of their last dollar was made, they were not even there. They didn't have even positions in the government, because even like the high-ranking, middle-ranking, and low-ranking positions in any governmental institution is divided among sects. And Hezbollah is one of the sects, one of the Shia sects in Lebanon, and they had zero employees in any institution because they had no power inside of the government. 2005 was the first time they enter into a political into the government, to be exact. They did have members of parliament, but they had like 2 members of parliament. So they're like nobody inside of the parliament. But they had no connection with anyone in the oligarchy, the 1% that's governing and ruling the party, despite the fact that one of their biggest allies, the other Shia movement or political bloc in Lebanon, which is the Amal movement, is way deep inside of the government. This is a big issue right now in Lebanon. We'll get to that later on, because Amal movement is very well known to be part of the corrupt government in Lebanon, yet it is a very big ally to the resistance, which is creating a lot of question marks to the resistance party as to why aren't you standing in the face of these people? And the regular answer is always, we don't want blood. We can be patient. We will get there through patience, politics, diplomacy. We don't want to stand in the face of any political party, especially another Shia political party in Lebanon, or else it will be a bloodbath. I don't like it, but I don't have a say in it. And I respect the wisdom of the resistance for taking that choice. Now, what happened is during that time, because the areas where Hezbollah was brought up in, and I'm talking about people in the communities in South Lebanon, in the Beqa and the suburban area of Beirut, they had nothing. We didn't have even paved roads in the suburbia of Beirut, in the areas where these people were living. In the south, if I needed to get to my village, which is 110 kilometers away from Beirut, I needed 6 hours on the road, 110 kilometers, because there were no paved roads. At that time, Hezbollah decided that we need to serve our community, not only to fight against the occupation, we need to serve our community. We all know what happened in the year 2000 with the greatest liberation that Lebanon has ever lived, with the liberation of South Lebanon completely, and the eastern part of Lebanon from the Israeli occupation at the hands of the Lebanese resistance Hezbollah. They decided to now serve the community. They had more time to serve their communities. How? You serve the community in which way? Health, education, finances. How do you do that? Finances by investing in certain industries to create an economy that would provide for the people. Health-wise, by creating services like medical centers or hospitals that will help the people, because they can't find any social security, any insurance to help them out in the medication. And you know, Beirut, I mean, if you want to go to a private hospital in Beirut, you're going to be paying out of your own blood. It's very, very expensive. It's even more expensive than most of the Western world. So in private hospitals in Beirut. So they decided that, and education by building and founding schools and later on universities to help their community. So Hezbollah started, because of the funding that it was getting from its friends, which they specifically said it was Iran and Syria, and later on even Iraq, that was helping the resistance. Why? Because, hello, people of the same region will help one another if you don't know about it. So because of the help that was coming from the friends of the resistance to stay put, to be steadfast in the face of the occupation, they were able to put that money into actual help for their community. Up until today, When you can't find medicine, when you can't go to the hospital because there's no electricity, or because they tell you you need to put a deposit of $200 because $200 before you go into the hospital, Hezbollah medical centers and Hezbollah hospitals has been accepting people at the rate of 1,500 Lebanese lira. By the way, the dollar is no longer at 1,500 Lebanese lira. The dollar is at 21,200 Lebanese lira, and they are 21,200 Lebanese lira, and they are still accepting the people. For example, right here in Khiyam, we have a medical center that accepts people with a notion of 7,000 Lebanese lira. Do you know how much 7,000 is? Stay with me. I'll tell you how much that in US dollar. 7,000 Lebanese lira for you to go and get the medical assistant that you need. 7,000, if I divide it by 21,200, that's 30 cents.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, instead of taking 20 US dollars, which is equals to 200 Lebanese lira, to get you the medical need that you need, the medical help that you need, they're taking 7,000 Lebanese lira, which is 30 cents from people to give them the best medical attention that they need. And now Hezbollah, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was quoted as saying yesterday in a closed meeting to certain communities inside of Hezbollah. I'm talking about, like, for example, the Martyrs Foundation, the Orphans Foundation, etc., etc., etc. They had their annual meeting, and it was reported in the news. We didn't see the speech, but it was reported on his behalf in the news by him saying that now members of Hezbollah are in Iran finalizing the contracts of buying fuel from Iran and of buying medicine from Iran, Iranian medicine in Lebanese lira. And Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and I quote him, he specifically said, if you don't want the Iranian fuel, easy, don't buy it. If you don't want the Iranian medicine, easy, don't take it. We want to buy it. We want to take it because we don't want to be ripped off anymore. Hezbollah schools, they have provided hundreds of thousands of people with free schooling. Why? Because they have the money for it, they invested in it, and the people deserve to get the best education that is found there. And they have the best institutions. And my evidence is by them ranking first in every official certificate in Lebanon, whether it's the baccalaureate, which means the high school diploma, or the university degrees as well. In the system of financial system, they have their own financial institution. It's not even a bank, it's an association. It's a financial association that gives small loans to people to start businesses.
So it's like a cooperative almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they give it, hear me out, they give it from 0 to 2% interest. That's no bank that has ever done in Lebanon. No bank ever. Now,
and anyone can
anyone, even if you're not Lebanese, just bring your passport, go to that association, give your passport out, and fill out the paperwork and bring out the evidence that you actually want to start a business. You get the money there.
And there was a time, wasn't there, when the US was trying to close down those banks? Am I misremembering that?
What happened is these banks were hacked.
Yeah.
It's not a bank, it's an association.
Yeah.
The association database was hacked. And surprise, surprise, the company that was actually looking after the security, and that was a big mistake at that time, the company that was looking after the security of this association was a company that was later on found to be directly affiliated with the Lebanese forces, with Thamir Jaja, which made it possible for the hacking to happen. What happened is, what was hacked was the name of the account members. So if you have an account number in that association, your name was out there, and most of the people who had account names were immigrants, were not. It's not immigrants. It's like diaspora, the Lebanese diaspora, who had bank accounts there because it was the safest way for them to not be involved in the Lebanese financial system that robbed them, but at the same time be able to leave enough money in the country in a safe place for their family members to be financially safe. So their names were revealed, and a lot of people of them were put on the list of sanctions by the US Treasury.
That's right. Okay, that's what I was remembering. I know we've been talking for quite a long time, and it's kind of
My
getting
pleasure.
late. But there's just a couple of things that I wanted to cover, because people are maybe not really aware of this. That yesterday, I think you touched on the fact that there were demonstrations at the port calling for the end of the Iranian occupation. You told me
Yeah.
yesterday that these demonstrations were organized by Jaja, who you've mentioned
Yeah.
a few times, and
Not
let's
only by him, but
say,
also by NGOs funded by the
yeah,
West as well.
yeah, exactly. But you also talked about on Twitter the assassination in Khalde. I
Yes.
would like to touch on that because, this was a pretty shocking event. And clearly it is linked to the anniversary of the port explosion. And add to this the artillery attacks and then the air raid carried out by Israel in close to where you are, right? In southern Lebanon. Of course, there's not going to be any international outrage or any UN complaints, etc. And finally, how close are we to a tipping point of war between Hezbollah and Israel?
I'm going to start 2006 that the Israeli occupation forces fires artillery not on the border, because they've done that before, but inside villages in the southern part of Lebanon. And it was the first time since 2006 an Israeli air raid throws bombs on us. They throw bombs at very, very testing hours, at very nervous hours, 1 a.m. in the morning and 4 a.m. in the morning. The air raids happened. 1 a.m. in Al Ahmadiyya village, which is 10 minutes away from my place, 10 minutes in a car, which is like about 5 kilometers away from here. And then at 4 a.m. in the Bayada in Sur, in Tyre, which is a coastal city in South Lebanon. They also bombed there. What happened is, allegedly, according to Israeli media and Israeli war office, the Ministry of War. It's not a defense ministry, it's a Ministry of War. But according to the Ministry of War and to the Israeli media, allegedly there were 3 rocket attacks from the Lebanese side. Now, mind you, since the beginning of the Sheikh Jarrah movement in Al-Quds, in occupied Al-Quds, and since the Sword of Al-Quds operation that devastated Gaza last May,
Yeah.
and the aggression against the people of occupied Al-Quds and the occupied West Bank, we have seen several attempts from the Lebanese side by different Palestinian factions who are trying to help their brothers and sisters inside of occupied Palestine by throwing missiles. Sadly, a lot of those missiles are really old ones, but at least the resistance is trying. The Palestinian resistance is trying to do something to help their brothers and sisters, because the level of massacre, the genocide that was going on inside of Palestine was unacceptable at all levels. So we did see a lot of rockets being fired. Most of the time, the rockets fell, sadly, inside of Lebanese villages. Thank God no one was hurt, but what happened yesterday, and I say again, allegedly, is that 3 rockets were allegedly fired from the Jazin area, which is, it's another part, it's another governorate. It's not Marjayoun, where they bombed. So from Jazin area, there was 3 rocket attacks that were targeting Kiryat Shmona, which is an illegal Israeli settlement built on Palestinian land on the border with Lebanon in the Upper Galilee. Minutes later, the Israeli side started shooting mortar shells, 155 millimeter mortar shells. There were 9 mortar shells into the Khiyam field, the same field where the Merkava was buried in 2006. Sadly, I was still trying to find a gas station to fill up my tank, and I happened to pass on the upper side of the hill where I stopped and I took the first video that I uploaded on Twitter and showed the people how Israel is bombing us. At that point, I need to note, I didn't know that there were any rockets fired from Lebanon. And even if there were rockets fired from Lebanon, that does not give the right for Israel to bomb Khiam residential area, because they were not even fired from Khiam. Not giving pretext for them to fire back, because this is not a fire back. This is a resistance against an occupation. I don't need to go there. But that's the first bombardment that happened. I went all the way to Hasbaya, which is 15 minutes away by car, which is like about 10 kilometers away from Khiam, to find a gas station. Nothing. I returned and I find my kids literally under the bed, one of them hiding under her grandmother. Why? Because they started bombing the hillside facing my house, and my house is on the outskirts of the village. It's not inside the village. We chose to build a house a bit away from people to try to enjoy the nature, because Beirut is it's such a concrete jungle. We needed the scenery. But again, when you're on the outskirts, you're more likely to die by an Israeli mortar shell. They started bombing the hill in front of us, and they started bombing, which is in an area called Hasbaya. And then they started bombing Farshuba Hills. They started bombing Shib'a. In Khiam, it was bombardment all around us. We were sitting in the house. Every bomb that fell, I was just looking into my kids' eyes, who I promised myself that they will not live what I lived. And I was seeing them for the first time living what I had lived as a child. I saw the fear in their eyes, but at the same time, I saw myself telling them, it's fine. It's nothing. It's going to end. Nothing is going to happen. But I was not sure that nothing's going to happen, because it's less than 1 kilometer away that the bombs were falling, the mortar shells were falling. That passed. The adrenaline was through the roof, but that passed, and it passed. It supposedly was fast, but it was going on so slow inside of my head. I was able to start to dance and put on some music. I don't want them to hear the mortar shells anymore. Okay, that passed by. We're done. No one was injured. The entire hillside was lit on fire. It stayed. The wildfire just ate all through the mountain until 11 p.m., where thankfully the civil defense was able to get their brigades there and put the fire out. But then again, at 1 a.m. today, we wake up on the most horrendous sound ever, which is an Israeli air raid that targeted Al-Ahmadiyya, where it's just a valley. It's surrounded by mountains, by woods, mountains and trees. No one's there. And it's way far from the border. So it's not even a point for the resistance to be residing. So they bomb us for the first time since 2006. They bomb again at 4 a.m. in Sur, South Lebanon. So all of this and the red lines that was crossed by Israel yesterday would point out that the resistance will not let this go. And on Saturday, we're going to have a speech by Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah commemorating the victory of the 2006 war. So I think that a lot of messages are going to be sent out. But that happening, being on the same date of calling for protests against Hezbollah, for a bombing that has nothing to do with Hezbollah, and just 2 days ahead of that, the assassination that happened in the wedding of Ali Shibli's sister, where a man came and assassinated him in front of his family. And then the second day, during the man's funeral, an ambush was made in Khalde, killing 4 members of the family, the same family. Doctors, lawyers, and engineers passed away because they were gunned down by snipers sitting on the roofs, who, by the way, are directly linked to Nusra Front that is wreaking havoc in Syria, and that has people who supports them, who went out into protests in Tripoli to support these terrorists, and in certain areas of Beirut as well, went out to support these terrorists, by the way. All of this happening at the same time. If you're going to look at that and say that they are not connected, that I'm sorry, but you have no idea what goes on inside of Lebanon and how the pretext of a war is being built inside of Lebanon. If you see all of these attempts to push for internal bickering, and when that didn't happen, to push for a war between Israel and the Lebanese resistance, you see that someone is trying so hard to make the resistance bring its weapons out, for them to have a pretext to get foreign intervention into Lebanon in the form of the coalition, the international coalition led by the United States of America, the greatest police in our galaxy. This is a pretext, an attempt to bring us to fight with whoever it is, whether it's an internal bickering and fighting, internal clash, civil war, you name it, or a war with Israel. Now, these two things are different. Hezbollah has vowed time and again that they will not be dragged into a civil war on any kind of war inside of Lebanon. And the evidence is what happened in Khalde when they decided not to engage, and they said that the Lebanese army can take care of it. Well, okay, the Lebanese army did arrest a couple of terrorists, but I think they were about to throw flowers on them when they were arresting them. It was a big charade. When you watch it, your blood would boil. But again, these decisions are made by someone who is bigger than the Lebanese army in Lebanon, aka the US ambassador Shia. Yeah. But at the same time, that aside, I think that the war with Israel is another thing, and Israel crossed a lot of red lines today and yesterday. And the answer to that most definitely will be coming on Saturday, and it might even come before that. We don't know how the resistance operates.
Yeah. Marwa, thank you so much. You are really such a symbol of the resistance for me, and a symbol of, I hope, the future, because it's people like you that have real integrity, real belief in resistance against imperialism, that are going to make it happen. And in all honesty, as I always say with Syria, you know, we have a huge debt of gratitude that we owe to the Syrian Arab Army and its allies for not only fighting and defeating multinational terrorism and mercenary armies, but containing them within Syria and preventing the exodus of those armies and whatever bloodbath would ensue in European countries and further abroad. So thank you on multiple levels, but thank you also for your insights. They are massively, massively appreciated. Thank you.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to know you, to be your friend, and to be part of the platform that you're presenting, especially for the world that has no idea what's going on in here. Because Lebanon is such a small country, but its politics is very, very complex. And you need to understand the history of it to understand what's going on right now. So I thank you for giving me the chance and the opportunity to be able to be the voice of the voiceless in Lebanon, because the mainstream media is making us drown.
Yeah.
As much as yesterday I just posted a video of me being bombed inside of my own house, and it was because of community standards on Facebook. It was taken down. What else can I do? So I need voices like yours as well, Vanessa, to bring out the voices of those who have no voices inside of our communities. Thank you very much for all the work that you do. And from your platform, I also want to thank Syria for supporting us all the way. We are one people. No one can break us apart. And I wish the best for my people and for the people of the region. And I wish you all the best and congratulate everyone, including you who support the resistance of the region for the upcoming victory of 2000, commemorating the victory of 2006 of us defeating our enemy and creating a deterrence equation that saved us and kept us safe so far, hopefully for the future as well. Thank you very much.